For several years, I have watched how my loved one is humiliated, how they wipe their feet on him and generally do not put anything in this life. It is extremely painful to watch all this because you understand that this person is kind and he will never answer anything to anyone. But sooner or later, such people run out of patience and they understand that they are being used.
From the bedroom window on the second floor, John Burke watched the scene unfolding at the entrance to his house. His wife, Christie, was in a passionate embrace with Jake Christensen, a man who always claimed to be his best friend. Jake had just brought Christie home after spending time together downtown, marking their 5th date. Watching their conversation, John caught details of their plan to further humiliate him. Jake expressed a desire to spend an entire week with Christie, to which she, after brief contemplation, responded with a refusal. She suggested spending just the weekend together, but with one condition. When Jake inquired what it was, Christie excitedly proposed making John pay for their date. Jake laughed at the idea, claiming it to be silly since he had enough wealth to cover any expenses. However, Christie insisted, explaining that if her husband paid for her romantic date with her lover, it would be a strong humiliation for John. Their discussion of the scheme turned into an exchange of looks and emotions, as Christie admitted she enjoyed humiliating John, and Jake confirmed that such games also excited him. Both were captivated by the idea, and Jake even suggested Christie leave John and marry him, to spend the rest of their lives together. Christie, however, treated the suggestion humorously, stating she would consider his proposal if John paid for their next weekend, filled with passion and wild sex. Jake, though slightly irritated by the idea, eventually agreed, anticipating that the upcoming weekend promised to be especially passionate. Afterward, he hugged Christie, whispering to her about their plans, and headed to his car, reminding her not to make him wait too long for their next meeting. Christie watched Jake leave, waving goodbye, then turned and entered the house, where John was waiting for her. Ascending to the bedroom, she locked eyes with John, who was sitting on the bed waiting for her. She smiled, looking down at him, and skillfully dropped her blouse to the floor. With her next movement, casual and calm, she unfastened her skirt, allowing it to slide to her feet, revealing herself completely. For her dates with Jake, she always preferred not to wear any underwear or other clothing items. Then Christie headed to the bathroom, leaving the door open behind her. Gazing at her reflection in the mirror and catching her husband's gaze in the reflection, she casually asked, "You heard our conversation, right? I'm leaving you for Jake. We plan to spend the weekend together, having sex, and you will, undoubtedly, cover the expenses. I intend to leave you forever and marry him," she candidly declared, without taking her eyes off the mirror. John, with heaviness in his voice, responded, "All these years, since we got married 3 years ago, I've been paying all our bills. I was sure everything was fine between us. I did nothing but love you with all my heart and tried to show it every day. Can you truly say you feel no love for me?" Christie reacted to the love he declared with disdain, sarcastically rebuking him for his weakness and indecision, which allowed his best friend to start a relationship with his wife. The moment she was distracted from her reflection in the mirror, she noticed John, standing by the window, unable to contain his emotions, beginning to sob on the bed. Christie showed no respect for his feelings. "What a wimp you are," she said. Accusing him of disrespecting her over the past months, she questioned their marital vows, mocking the words they once said before the altar. Her words were filled with sarcasm and contempt for John, who, in her opinion, did not deserve her attention or love. Despite her cruelty, John continued to plead with her, expressing his unwavering love for Christie, even as his heart was shattered by her words. "Do you not understand that I love you?" he said. His gaze, full of love and admiration for her beauty, remained unchanged, as on their wedding day when he happily slipped the wedding ring on her finger. However, Christie rejected his feelings, disdainfully noting that she would never let him touch her again. She even threatened to replace him with a real man who could satisfy her needs and mocked John. I have a great suggestion for you. I could let you watch as your best friend and I have sex on our bed, she said. At that moment, lost in her fantasies, Christie failed to notice the sudden change in John's facial expression. His usually gentle features turned stern, his jaw muscles tensed, and his hands clenched into fists with anger. John, who had always been loving and gentle, for the first time unleashed a torrent of angry words, while Christie's hand, accustomed to caressing him, froze in midair, not expecting such a reaction from him. Straightening up and turning her head, she watched as he left the room, beginning to descend the stairs with a sense of intrigue and slight apprehension. Christie left the comb in the sink and hurried down after John, noticing him heading towards the front door. "Where are you going? To the pub to drink and complain to the bartender about your miserable existence? Or decided to run to Mommy and cry on her shoulder like a little boy?" she sarcastically threw at him, standing on the stairs with her arms hanging by her sides. He paused at the door, sadly looking back at her for a few heavy seconds. In their former bedroom, he realized he had taken everything he possibly could from her and concluded that he owed her nothing more. "Goodbye, Christie," he finally said before the door closed behind him. The sound of his car door opening, then slamming shut, the engine coming to life, and soon she saw him drive away. Where he was headed, Christie wondered, but then just shrugged. To hell with him, let him go wherever he wants, she thought, dismissing the situation with disdain. Grabbing her phone, she dialed a familiar number. "Hello, my dear," she purred affectionately. "My beloved has slithered away, so why don't you come over? Are you on your way? Hurry, I can't wait." 3 days later, John pulled up to the house, opening the garage door with a remote from his car. Driving inside, he closed the large door behind him. Grabbing his briefcase, he headed into the house with determination. In the morning, Christie was at the kitchen table, engrossed in reading the newspaper and enjoying the aromatic coffee. At this time, John, without saying a word, walked past her and headed to his home office, full of curiosity. Intrigued, Christie quickly stood up and approached the door of his office. Trying to enter, she found the door locked, which seemed odd to her since John usually didn't lock it. After a short knock and a click of the lock, she was able to enter and saw John intently studying a map of the area on the computer. Assuming her husband was busy with a project for a residential complex near the lake, she found him at work. John gave her a heavy look and curtly asked what she wanted. Christie, feeling unsure due to her husband's unexpected rudeness, began to express her concern. She confessed that she had been worried about him, as he had disappeared for 3 days and hadn't answered calls. Her words sounded unconvincing, given her recent disrespectful behavior towards him. John sarcastically inquired if she was really worried about him, which made Christie ponder. There was something unusual about him, as if he had changed inside. Trying to ease the awkwardness, she attempted to touch him, but John dodged her touch. Offended, she asked if he didn't want to kiss his wife after such a long absence. His gaze, filled with detachment, seemed to study her before he shook his head negatively and asked her to close the door behind her as he returned to his work on the computer. Christie was truly bewildered. Her usually attentive and affectionate husband had suddenly become distant and cold. Sitting across from her, he seemed like a completely different person, making Christie involuntarily shudder. She cautiously closed the office door behind her and quickly headed to the bedroom for her phone. At the first ring, Jake's voice was heard on the other end of the line. "Jake, he's back," she began, "but something's wrong. He didn't even kiss me when he arrived." With words of consolation, Jake replied that perhaps her husband had realized her departure and felt powerless to change the situation. Promising to come in the evening and solve everything together, he pledged to talk to Christie's husband, who had previously been his best friend. Doubtful, yet hoping for the best, Christie agreed to meet with Jake in the evening. John, having heard part of her conversation, smiled and returned to his work at the computer. In the evening, when Jake arrived, Christie joyfully greeted him at the door, hugged him, and kissed him passionately. "Where is he?" Jake asked as they pulled away from each other. Pointing to the office door where her husband had spent the entire day, Christie asked Jake to talk to him alone. Approaching the office door, the lover knocked, finding it was locked. "John, it's me, your friend Jay. Can we discuss something?" The sound of the clicking lock was heard as Jake entered the office. He met John with a friendly smile and approached him, his hand already outstretched for a greeting. However, after a moment, his steps slowed. John, settled behind the desk and leaning back in his chair, watched Jake intently. The initial smile on Jake's face disappeared, and his hand dropped in a gesture of resignation. "Close the door behind you and sit down," John said in a commanding tone, nodding towards an empty chair. Jake obediently closed the door and sat down, watching as John slowly poured himself a drink. "Aren't you going to offer your friend a drink?" Jake asked, as John was already closing the whiskey bottle's lid and putting it back in place. John paused for a moment, looking at Jake as if he was nothing. "Friend? Do you really consider yourself my friend?" he asked. Jake felt embarrassed, avoiding John's gaze. Damn, Christie was right, he thought to himself, realizing that John was not the weak beta male he was used to. "Of course I was your best friend for many years," Jake replied. John smirked. "Best friend, huh?" He drew out the words, savoring their meaning. "Tell me, what kind of friend seduces the wife of an old buddy?" "John, I'm sorry," Jake began, but John interrupted him. "You're so impatient in your desire to have Christie, aren't you?" he asked. Jake nodded, as if admitting his feelings. "How much do you want her? In other words, what's her price to you?" John continued. Jake looked at him, not understanding where the other was going. "Don't pretend you don't understand, Jake," John said with a sarcastic smile. "You're an experienced businessman with negotiation skills. All your millions speak for themselves. Every deal has its price. So tell me, what's Christie's price to you?" Jake felt insecure as he muttered, "I don't know." His friend John, with a smile on his face, quickly picked up the conversation, asking, "Have you guessed that I have a proposal, right? By the way, your new Bentley is simply magnificent. Tell me, how much did it cost you?" "Over $500,000, Jake proudly replied, not hiding his bravado. "And was it a special order?" asked John. "Yes, I paid for the car in full," Jake answered. John, smiling, thoughtfully twirled his glass in his hands. "Excellent. This could be a good start for our deal," he said, taking a sip from his glass. "I also need 25% of your total capital," John said seriously. "Wait, what did you say?" Jake asked, disbelieving his ears. "You want me to give you my Bentley plus 25% of my capital in exchange for Christie?" With a subtle smile, John added, "Exactly. It will cost more than $50 million. Jake, gasping with indignation, exclaimed, "You must be joking. Are you out of your mind?" "My research shows the exact amount to be $53 million, John calmly continued, checking the data on his computer. "And no, I am absolutely serious." Nervously getting up from his chair, Jake began to pace back and forth across the office, muttering something under his breath and throwing John displeased looks. John, however, seemed absorbed in sorting through papers and paid no attention to Jake's agitation. Finally stopping, Jake asked tensely, "So you want my car and 25% of my capital in exchange for Christie?" He realized that Christie was right. John was not someone who could be easily manipulated. "Why should I even consider this when your wife has already decided?" Jake said, and laughed at John. Opening one of the documents on his computer, John immediately sent it to print. The printer emitted a short beep, and he pulled out a warm sheet, extending it to Jake. "Have you thought about the consequences? What if the board of directors and shareholders find out? Will you be able to maintain your wealth and power after the scandal, when the document appears in the media?" asked John, pouring himself more whiskey, accusing Jake of blackmail. Jake, grimacing, read the letter, which detailed all aspects of their intrigue, including how he and Krista became tools of psychological pressure and humiliation against John. Also, in the report were evidence, and Jake could be easily accused of money laundering. "You can think whatever you like, but you have until noon tomorrow," John declared, setting a deadline and a price for his silence, a controlling stake in the company. "This is extortion," Jake protested, waving his hands. "You won't get away with this." John, thoughtfully sipping his drink, replied, "Maybe, maybe not. But if you want Krista, though I can't see why, my price remains the same. Accept my offer without reservations, and I promise you and Krista can spend the rest of your lives together without my interference. Isn't that what you want?" Pondering, Jake admitted that he did indeed wish to spend his life with Krista. Smiling, John offered, "If you agree, I'll even organize a celebration dinner for you two. What do you say?" "I need time to think," Jake replied, lost in thought. John nodded understandingly, promising, "I'll make this public by noon tomorrow, so I'll be waiting for your decision as soon as possible," bending his arm and tapping his watch face with his fingernail. At that moment, the watch began to count down the time. Meanwhile, his former friend took a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from his face and neck. "Please don't forget to close the door behind you when you leave," John concluded the conversation, signaling that the meeting was over. Perplexed, Jake rose and left the office, staggering on numb legs. Through the curtains, the office owner watched as Jake and Krista left. He smiled and made several phone calls. Krista only returned home at dawn. Hearing their conversation on the driveway, John caught Jake's words. "Just think, in a couple of days we'll start a new life without John. Now let me in and try these breakfasts," he finished, affectionately slapping Krista on the buttocks, to which she laughed and pulled him along, promising, "Not now, but soon." "I can't wait for John to be our waiter," Krista said, kissing Jake and entering the house because Jake had agreed to the deal, and they wanted John to organize their evening. Noticing that the light in her husband's room was on, Krista wondered if he had been there all this time. Trying to open the door, she found it locked. "John, we've made a decision. I'm leaving you," she shouted through the door, but heard no response. Krista lingered by the locked door, listening, but then decided to move on, concerned about her husband's strange behavior. Krista went up to the master bedroom to find John. Meanwhile, John received a brief message from Jake's representative, who requested his offshore account details from Miles, and John immediately responded, providing the offshore account number, and warned he would be in touch to ensure the transaction was completed. A few hours later, John confirmed that the agreed sum had been received in full. He instantly transferred it, distributing it among several other accounts he had access to, thereby completing the financial operation. John sent a message to Jake and Chrissy, informing them that dinner would be held tonight at 7 p.m. Immediately after, he went shopping to prepare everything needed for the evening meal and returned an hour later, starting the preparations in the kitchen with special enthusiasm. Cooking always brought John pleasure, especially when it involved such a significant farewell dinner for him and his guests. Chrissy got home around 6 p.m. and headed straight to the kitchen, where, to her surprise, she found John cooking dinner. Until that evening, she had no idea her husband possessed culinary talents. "I didn't know you could cook," she said with genuine surprise. John looked at her, slightly raising an eyebrow and leaning on the table with both hands, before replying, "There's a lot you don't know about me." He continued, wiping his hands with a cloth. "Maybe if you stayed home sometimes instead of running off to your lover, you could learn something too. At least I've learned to stand up for myself. Now go and get ready. Your dinner will be ready soon." Chrissy tried to kiss him on the cheek, as she did the day before, but John turned away, avoiding her touch. Leaving the kitchen, Chrissy staggered upstairs as tears streamed down her face. "What have I done?" she asked herself. A few minutes before 7 p.m., Jake appeared at the front door and rang the bell. Opening the door, John immediately let him in, wasting no time on extra words. Soon after, Jake took out some documents with signatures from the bag he brought with him and handed John the keys to a Bentley. Smiling, John said, "As promised." In response, Jake, coughing dryly, joked, "Damn, my throat's a desert from all this. Got anything to drink?" "Thanks for keeping your word. I'll soon give you a bottle of fine champagne to celebrate," John replied, pocketing the keys and looking forward to the moment he could take a ride in the new Bentley. Christie came downstairs, dazzling in a short black dress with an open back that left little to the imagination. John noticed she wasn't wearing her rings. Approaching the dining table, John thoughtfully pulled out a chair for her. She smiled at him as she sat down, but he didn't return her smile. Jake, on the other hand, sat down, smiling broadly, and said, "You look stunning, dear," kissing her hand and admiringly looking at her. "Wonderful that you took off your rings," he added. When John brought 2 glasses of champagne to the table and then returned with a large dish, lifting the lid to release a cloud of steam, everyone happily inhaled the aroma of his homemade lasagna. "Maybe you missed your calling," Jake joked, laying a napkin on his lap. John silently served the lasagna, distributing portions onto the plates. Chrissie, taking a fork, didn't look up at John and asked, "Aren't you joining us?" John, pouring the champagne, shook his head. "No, this dinner is for you. I don't want to intrude on your evening." John retreated to a distance and watched the couple in love with interest as they joyfully drank champagne, exchanging toasts in honor of each other and their shared happy future. Gradually, they stopped paying attention to him, allowing him to slip away unnoticed to his office, a smirk playing on his face. Settling into his chair, John glanced at the clock, contemplating his next moves. In an instant, he heard the noise of a fall and a crash. Looking into the dining room, he found Christie and Jake in an unusual position. Jake with a pale face hidden behind a plate of lasagna, his hand limply hanging down. Christie appeared seductively undressed due to her slipped dress, her head down, surrounded by shards of glass. John surmised that the couple would be unconscious for at least 6 hours. He began his work. Undressing both lovers completely, he carefully intertwined their bodies together, tying their hands and legs to each other. Then, taking a cart with him, he wheeled them outside, wrapping the bodies in heavy chains with weights for security, and placing gags in their mouths in case they woke up. After some effort, he placed them in a large canvas bag, bought specifically for this occasion. Using the cart and a lift, John moved the bag with the lovers into the trunk of his Bentley, then headed to the destination under the starry sky. Upon arrival, after a few hours, he heard rustling and muffled sounds. When he loosened the ties and opened the bag, 2 stunned heads peeked out, looking around in complete panic at the darkness surrounding them. John leaned over the captives, holding a compact taser in his hand. "If you promise to keep quiet, I'll release you and answer any questions," he offered, threateningly adding that any scream would be strictly punished, while demonstratively showing the taser in his hand. The captives nodded in agreement almost simultaneously, and John immediately freed them from the gags. "Where are we?" Christie asked anxiously, her voice trembling with horror. "Who are you, and what's happening here?" she inquired. Jake also expressed his confusion, but John, turning to Christie, said, "You're in a place where the real John decided to end his life." Christie didn't understand what it all meant, and assumed they had been kidnapped by a maniac. "You all misunderstand. John told me how you 2 miserable and terrible people humiliated him," said John. To the surprise of those present, John revealed that he was not John, but his twin brother, sharing not only identical DNA, but also the same name with matching initials. Christie and Jake were astonished by this revelation, like deer caught in headlights. "I warned him about you, Christie, but he was too in love to listen to me," John continued, showing how close he had been to intervening in their relationship at the crucial moment of their wedding. He expressed regret for not doing so, blaming himself for the consequences. Stunned, Christie asked John where he had been on their wedding day, still disbelieving what was happening before her eyes. "I never noticed you before," she began, trying to remain inconspicuous and not attract unnecessary attention. "John told me about you, Christie. Despite our close communication, John and I were very different. He was always patient and kind, able to find common ground with everyone around. Unlike me, John tried to avoid conflicts and was always ready to do a lot for your happiness, loving you with all his heart." After a short pause, he continued, "As for me, I saw through you from the beginning. I was certain that you would be the one to betray him at the first opportunity. You could say it was my sixth sense or just intuition. For John's sake, I hoped I was wrong about you. Unfortunately, I was right," he concluded, dejectedly clasping his fingers and looking into the distance. "John never mentioned he had a brother," Christie whispered in amazement. "Yes, because I might as well not exist in his life," he replied sarcastically. "I could tell you why, but then I'd have to eliminate you," he added, then laughed at his own joke. "As you can see, it's quite dark now, so you surely can't make out the surroundings," he continued after the laughter had subsided. "Just in case you're still interested, we are in the very heart of a bottomless lake. Here, in this place, John decided to put an end to all this madness a few days ago. He couldn't bear what you did to him anymore and chose the simplest way out," he concluded with a heavy heart. "I tried to stop him, but he was inconsolable." Tears uncontrollably streamed down Krista's cheeks as she, trembling with fear and sorrow, turned to John. "John, is it true? He passed away?" Her voice sounded so tremulous that the air was filled with the sharpness of despair. John, not hiding his disdain, responded with a clearly mocking tone. "Yes, and to a large extent you yourself are complicit in his death. You told him there was no love, that he was not needed by you. It's the same as pulling the trigger, aiming a gun at his head." He turned his gaze to Jake, his words piercing the air. "And you, Jake, always pretended to be his friend, but in reality, you stole his wife, betrayed him. Aren't you ashamed of what you've done?" "He was always my friend," Jake began, but John interrupted him. "You were never a true friend to him. You used him, played on his feelings, humiliated him at any opportunity. And now here you are, Jake, asking me about promises, about how you and Christa will spend the rest of your lives together." John continued ruthlessly exposing Jake, who, consumed by despair and pain, burst out emotionally. "You promised! You said we would be together, but you lied," Jake said. John merely smirked coldly in response to Jake's accusations. "Yes, I said you would be together, and I didn't lie. I just didn't specify that your life together would be short. In the end, you will die on the same day, which is, after all, fair after everything you did to my brother." Christa continued to cry, pleading for mercy, while John, with cold contempt in his voice, concluded, "Unfortunately, I cannot forgive you for such a thing. Please don't do this, not to us." They cried out, but his words were just the echo of the merciless truth he revealed, exposing the bitter, treacherous game that led to the tragedy. John looked at her with cool indifference. "Before you so cruelly rejected him, crushing his dreams and betraying his trust. He was so depressed. When he told me about it, your reaction was only cold laughter, suggesting he resign himself to the role you had prepared for him. Well, now it's your turn to face the inevitable." "You're crazy," she exclaimed, frantically rummaging through her bag. "Let us go. You won't get away with this." John merely shrugged. "Maybe not, but maybe so," he said calmly. "But once they find your farewell letter on the computer, it won't matter anymore." Smiling, he added, "I must admit, the letter is truly touching. But let's change the subject. You do know that no one has ever found the bottom of this lake? It's not called bottomless for nothing, and the chain tightly wrapped around you both will ensure your descent is swift." Reaching out to the ringing chain, John made it jingle, capturing the horrified gazes of both accomplices. "I assume you'll remain conscious for no more than a minute, and after that you might live for a bit longer," he grimly predicted, preparing for goodbye. "It's a pity there will be no music or ceremony this time. I hope you enjoy your honeymoon," he added sarcastically, tipping the sack and pushing it into the water, where the couple began to desperately struggle for their lives, screaming in terror. John quietly said, "Bon voyage," watching as their silhouettes disappeared into the dark depths, leaving behind only the bubbles that soon ceased to appear, restoring the lake to its usual tranquility. Then, under the bright moonlight, he started the boat's engine and headed towards Cove Pier, guided by the lights flickering through the fog. Upon arrival, he turned off the engine and, jumping into his discreetly parked Bentley, vanished into the night. Under the thick shadows of the docks, he ignited the engine, which hummed softly. John made a mental note to destroy all evidence, after which he sent a text message. Receiving an instant reply, he smiled. "Thanks, brother. Enjoy the trip."
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!